Yes. Okay. There we go. Yeah. So, good afternoon, all. Good afternoon again. Welcome to the fourth MuleSoft meetup of Calicut Community Group. So, I'm really happy, reuniting with you guys again after a long time. So, last month we couldn't actually conduct another meetup. Usually, we have this, trend of connecting every meetups during every month, but we couldn't do that last month. So, yeah, it's after a month we all are uniting again. So I'm very happy, having seeing so many of you, especially on a weekend, Saturday afternoon, especially when all of you are in the weekend mode. So thank you guys, thank you all for joining, and I'm sure you guys will benefit the best out of it because it's an interesting topic as well as we have a very interesting speaker. So I'll come to that on the fly. Yeah. So without further delay, so let me move to the next slide. So, as in usual meetups and as we normally do, let me read out the safe harbor statement for you guys. So, both the speaker and the host are organizing this meetup in individual capacity only. We are not representing our companies here. So, this presentation is strictly for learning purposes only. Organizer or presenter do not hold any responsibility that same solution will work for your business requirements. And the third one, this presentation is not meant for any promotional activities. Yep. So that's it about the safe harbor statement. So moving on to the organizers. So that's me. So I'm John Matthew Phillip. So I'm working at NJC Labs and I'm based out of Kochi. And I've been working in integration domain predominantly in MuleSoft for the last 2+ years. So that's pretty much about me. And beside me, you can see my co-host, who is Fatima Farzana. She's also working at NGC Labs. But unfortunately, today she couldn't join because of some prior appointment. So I'll be the one who is organizing and moderating the event today. Yep. And about today's agenda, in short, we are, as I said in the beginning, we are having an interesting topic called message resequencing in Mule. Most of you must not have heard this in any of the meetups because it's a new topic. So we'll be talking about what exactly is this message resequencing theory or this concept in Mule, followed by a demo and walkthrough by Vishwas. And as usual, we'll be ending up the session with a trivia quiz and wrap up. Okay. And coming to today's speaker, I'm sure most of you must not have seen or heard Vishwas for in during meetups or in meetups page or something. You must not have seen him, but people who are really into watching YouTube videos related to integration and MuleSoft, you guys must be knowing Vishwas for sure. Because Vishwas is having a very good YouTube channel. I think Vishwas, it's the name is also Vishwas Pawar, right? The channel.
Yeah, it's my name. Yes.
Yes, yes. So you can really see some. This is not any kind of marketing or something, guys, but I really have to appreciate that because his contents are really good with respect to the level of explanation, everything he gives. So you guys can go have a look at it. So that's how I really found out Vishwas, and Vishwas was very busy when I really approached him. So he was so eager to accept this, and there he is today. So I think Vishwas, maybe you can start with a small intro about yourself, and I can hand over the screen from here to you. You can maybe start sharing your screen. I'll stop it right away.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks, John.
yeah.
Yeah. So, hello everyone. I'm Vishwas. I work at Epicero as a senior solution consultant, and I've been working in on MuleSoft specifically for like more than 2 years now. Before that, I've mostly worked on Java and Spring Boot. Yeah. So that's all about me. And today we'll be talking about an interesting topic, which is message resequencing. Uh,
Which was sorry to interfere, but you're not sharing your screen, right? I can't see anything. Have you
yeah,
shared your screen?
not yet. I'm
Yeah,
sharing
yeah,
my
sure,
screen.
sure, sure, sure. Yeah,
Yeah, sure.
yeah.
Okay.
Meanwhile, Vishwas shares. I missed out one part. So, guys, as usual, if you have any questions in between, you can leave your questions. We'll be taking the questions at every regular intervals. It will be good for us to really look into it. Other than everything getting junked up in the general section, you can leave your questions in Q&A section. I have enabled it for all of you, so you can leave your questions there, and we'll be taking it during regular intervals. Okay, thank you guys.
Okay. Let me know if you guys are able to see my screen.
Yep, I can see it, Vishwas. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So this is the topic that we are. Yeah. So we'll be talking about message resequencing today. So the idea is that there could be situations wherein the message comes from the source system but it gets out of order, and we basically want the end system basically wants the message to be coming in a specific order. So in such cases, the middleware has to resequence the messages, that is make it into correct sequence and order, and then send it accordingly. So that is the use of a resequencer. So MuleSoft doesn't provide an out of the box mechanism for resequencer, although they do provide an aggregator module, but that's slightly different, that aggregates all the message and sends it uh, all together, right? So but in this case, if there is a requirement wherein you want message coming on demand, but it has to go out of the system to the target in a specific sequence, in that case we can create a resequencer utility and use it. So that is what it's saying about applications require messages to be received in a specific order without gaps. So when I say gaps, it means that a message is coming, it has a sequence number 5, but the sequence number 5 is not the right, it could have a sequence which is starting from 1. So unless and until it receives message with sequence 1, 2, 3, and 4, the fifth should not be processed. So that is what I mean by gaps. So messages, if they come with gap, they have to be stored somewhere, and then unless and until the previous gets processed, it should not get processed. So that is what uh, gap means over here. So yeah, in such cases, the application needs to have ability to resequence message on arrival and then process them. Yeah, so whenever message arrives, if it based on the sequence, it will just move it, and if the sequence is like having gaps, it will just store it. So we'll create a resequencing utility API, which will basically give us the ability to track all the messages and then resequence. So basically, to have track of these messages, we will need to use a database. So the database will keep track of whatever messages are there, what is the sequence, what is the latest sequence, then what is the sequence start from where it should actually start, and in case if there are messages which are having gaps, they will be stored in the database. So that's the overall idea what we are going to achieve while creating the resequencer utility. So here is a use case overview. So it's quite a very basic use case, but the real life use case will be very complicated, but it's on the same lines. For example, you might have a message. So in this message, I have given straightforward key value pairs, but the actual message might have a JSON, and in that JSON, you might have some fields which could be the version and number. So usually any message should at least have the number, sequence number, the sequence version, and the sequence type. So here it's a very basic example, so I have given it as packet. So these are data packets which are flowing through some application, and they usually get out of order. Think of it as an internet communication, right? They go through a TCP/IP protocol, and then the data packets might get out of order. So at the end, the receiver has to make sure that all the packets are in the correct sequence, so that the data remains consistent. So that is what we are trying to achieve. So it should have the sequence type. So this is a packet sequence. There could be another sequence which could be shipment sequence, right? So that is what sequence type means. So it's a unique value which identifies what kind of sequence it is. Then we have the sequence version. So sequence version is as good as revision. For example, you have the sequence version DPS1. So there will be an end to this sequence, right? So for example, it starts from 1 and it ends until 20. So when 20 comes for that sequence version, it means that it has finished everything, right? So now we'll have a different version of that sequence. So for example, here we have sequence version 2. So this is what sequence version denotes. It's basically a revision of message, a set of messages. Yeah. So then we have the sequence number. So sequence number is like it's quite obvious, right? So if it is first message, second or third, so it denotes the sequence. And then we have the actual data. So actual data can have your JSON payload or XML payload, or here it's string. So I'm just sending a string which is max, MAX. So this might come in any order, and we basically have to resequence. So there's yet another example. It's just same thing, but it's a different revision. So the revision was DPS1. Now the revision is DPS2. Again, it has set of three messages which will have to be uh, pushed into the right sequence. So that's a use case that we'll be looking at, and a demo on the same. Yeah. So let me just move on to the next slide. Yeah. So the solution overview. So we'll create a resequencer utility API, and this utility API will leverage three different tables. Now I'll tell you what all these tables do. So One table is the sequence type. So sequence type is the main table which has to be populated manually. The reason behind populating this table manually is that whenever you tell someone to resequence, he should at least know what is the sequence start, right? So you have to push in data into this table to let it know what is the sequence start. For example, uh, the packets messages can have a sequence starting from 1, but the shipment messages might have a sequence starting from 10 or something, right? So the application doesn't know automatically, right? You have to tell it, okay, this is the sequence start, and you have to start it from here. So this table basically has to be populated manually with the sequence type, the sequence start, and all those details. We'll come on to this table later on, but just giving you an idea. So using this table, the resequencer API, utility API will realize what is the sequence start for this particular sequence type. So that's about the sequence type table. Then we have the sequence state table. So this table will basically store what is the state of a sequence. For example, what is the latest sequence for packets sequence type with the sequence revision as DPS1. So for example, whatever is the latest message that has been processed, that will be stored in the sequence state. For example, if the third message in the sequence was processed latest, so it will have that detail so that we can process the next message as and when required. So it keeps track of what all the sequence are processed, and it will always have the latest sequence which got processed recently, right? And then we have the sequence stored messages. So this table is used when the messages are coming that are having gaps. For example, you first got a message with sequence 1, you processed it, so the sequence state, latest sequence will change to 1 because it's now processed. But then you get a message which is having a sequence number as 10. So there are 9 messages missing in between, right? So in that case, you cannot process the 10th message, but you have to store it somewhere until and unless all the 9 messages get processed. So this is where we use the sequence stored message to store the message. So the moment the ninth message comes in, we'll remove the 10th message and process it again. Yeah, so that's the idea. So basically we are relying on these three different tables to track the state and also requeue the same data which came with a gap, so that once all other data is processed, when the number comes for this message, it gets processed. So that's the overall solution that we are looking at. Then this resequencer utility API will have three different endpoints. Now, one is the get endpoint. So get endpoint is used to retrieve what is the sequence state. For example, you receive a message with sequence number as 2, and the sequence number 1 is yet to be processed. So in that case, you need to know, right, what should be done. I mean, is this the latest sequence or is it with gaps, right? So in that case, you need to have a get endpoint. So basically what it does is it takes in the sequence type. For example, in our case, we'll have packets. The id means the revision or the sequence version, which was DPS1 that we saw in previous slide, and the message sequence number. So the message sequence number is the sequence number, for example, 1 2 3 or whatever it is, right? So that will come. So if the sequence number is just immediate one after the latest, for example, the latest one was 2 and the sequence that we have asked for is 3, so which means that it's eligible to be processed, right? Because the sequence 2 was prior to this and it was processed successfully. So in that case, it returns true. It returns true if message sequence number is next in sequence. Okay. Then it returns false when the message sequence number has gaps. So for example, like I said, right, you process the latest message which was having the message sequence number as 2, but now you're receiving a message sequence number 10, so it has a gap of some messages, right? So in that case, it will return false. Okay. And it returns 400 response when you provide an invalid value. For example, the latest sequence that was processed for a particular sequence type was 2, but now you're sending value as 1, right, which is not valid because we already processed 2 and you are sending as 1, which is invalid. So it will just send a 400 response. And then all of this response have to be orchestrated by the API, which is utilizing this utility API. So basically it could be a process API which has to uh, orchestrate the responses and take decisions accordingly. So again, we have a put endpoint. So put endpoint is same as the get endpoint. It's just that we have to give some data to it. So what it will do, it will update the latest sequence and sequence state. So once you get a true response, for example, you make a get call, you get a true response. Then basically, uh, if you finish processing that particular message, you'll have to call the put endpoint so that uh, the table gets updated with the latest sequence. So that is the use of this. And then if uh, this put endpoint also has an ability to resequence the message, requeue the message. So what do I mean over here is, for example, take an example. You have a message uh, 10 which is stored because the messages were having gap. Okay, and now you receive a message which is having a sequence number 9. Okay, so since you are getting a message with sequence number 9 and the 10th one is already stored, right, so it is just immediate after 9, right? So there's no point waiting. So what this application will do is, basically when you receive a request, put request to update the latest sequence as 9, it will search if there is any immediate sequence after 9. For example, in this case it's 10, right? So it will automatically requeue the message, or call, I mean requeue the message. If there are queues, it will requeue the message. If there is an HTTP endpoint, it will automatically trigger the 10th message to the application from wherever it came. Okay, so that is what I mean by requeue. It will requeue the immediate next message when a put call is received. In case if there are any, if there are not, then it won't do any requeuing mechanism. And again, it returns 400 if invalid sequence is being passed. Now post. So post is will be used only when the messages are having gaps. For example, if you, same thing, you get a message 2 but then you get a message 10, so latest sequence is 2 but the upcoming sequence is 10, which means that there are gaps. So in this case we'll have to store the message. So you need to call the post endpoint, and this endpoint will basically store the message into the database. And then depending on when the ninth message comes and you trigger a put, it will automatically be requeued. Yeah. So that's an overview of the API endpoints that we have in this resequencer utility API. Now let's move on to the next slide, which is the database table. So this is the sequence type. So sequence type will have sequence type, which is packets, requeue exchange. So this solution is designed keeping queues in mind. Okay, but your solution might differ. It might not have queues. In case if you have RESTful endpoints, you can just modify it accordingly, right? But this was designed keeping queues in mind. So it has an exchange, it has a routing key, and like I said, right, you have to at least tell what is the sequence start. So sequence start is 1. So this table has to be populated manually. The other two tables will be handled by the utility API. So suppose this table is populated. Now you trigger a request and you send the first message. So if you send the first message, the sequence state will now have an entry with the sequence type as packets, ID, which is the revision ID with this TPS1, and the latest sequence will be 1. So this will have the latest sequence. So now when the next message 2 comes in, it will update with 2. But in case if there is a gap, for example, a message comes, oh, sorry, yeah. So for example, if a message comes with a sequence number of 10, it will basically be pushed to the sequence stored message, for example, over here. So the message with ID 2 didn't come, but 3 came. So it pushed it to the sequence stored message. So it is having packets, TPS1, and the sequence data, which could be anything. It could be a string, it could be JSON. So we also have a MIME type. So the reason behind having this MIME type is because we want to requeue the message, right? Like I previously mentioned, if the message is already stored and it is just next in the sequence, so it has to be requeued. So when we have to requeue the message, we basically need to know what is the MIME type so that we can reconstruct the whole payload. So in this case, it's JSON, but in some cases it could be XML or some other MIME type. So in that case, that's the reason we have this MIME type. And then we have the timestamp. So yeah, that's basically something good to have when the message came, and that's that sort of thing. Yeah, so that's about the database table. So John, are there any doubts or questions in the comments?
I think we should we are good to go. Seems like everyone is understanding everything. No one has asked any doubts so far.
Okay, cool.
Yes. Yeah. I don't see any
So
questions. Yeah.
yeah, let's go to the demo now.
Yep.
I'll share the application. Okay. Okay, are you guys able to see my screen?
Yes, Vishwas. Yeah.
Okay, all right. So I have created two APIs. One is the data packets process API, which will orchestrate everything, and the main one is the resequencer utility API. So this packets API will basically call all those endpoints and do the orchestration as required. So let's first move to the resequencer utility API. So let's go to the main flow. Yeah. So I have implemented three different endpoints: put, get, and post. So put is basically to like uh, update the latest sequence, and then if there is any message already there in the table, requeue it. So that's the reason I have implemented a try, and it will have a transactions, because we basically, when we requeue the message, we'll have to delete the record, right? So in case if there are any failures, we want the database to be in a consistent state. So that is why there's a try. But let's first go to the get. So in this get, I am basically getting the message sequence number and storing there the ID and the type. So we are storing all this detail into a variable, and then we go to this flow. Okay, so now in this flow, all right, yeah. So in now in this flow, what we are doing is we are getting the latest sequence number. So based on uh, if for example, if we have a sequence which is like, I'll show in the postman. Yeah, so this is a sample request, right? So if I send this request, so this is the message sequence number. So based on this, I'll trigger a query to the database, and I'll select the latest sequence number from the database based on the sequence type and the ID that I have. So once I trigger this request, I'm getting the payload, and then I have a choice route. So if the payload is not empty, but the message sequence number that has come into the request is less than the latest sequence number, it means that this is something wrong, right? Because this would be a situation wherein you have passed the sequence number 1 from the request, but the database is having the latest sequences 2, which means that the request is wrong. So we just send out a 400 bad request and the payload. So it's just saying that latest sequence number is greater or equal to the sequence number that you have entered. So it's basically a bad request. So we'll just respond with that. Now, in case if now this is a condition with gaps. So if payload is not empty and the sequence number minus the latest sequence is having a difference more than one, which basically means that there are gaps. So it's a situation wherein the latest sequence is 2 in the table, but the message that has come is having a value of 10, which means that there are some message which are yet to arrive. So what we do in this case, we return a value as false. So that the process API which is calling can call the post endpoint and then store the message. Now, in case if both the conditions do not work, so now in this case, the message might be the latest, I mean, the first in the sequence, right? So that is what we are doing. We are checking the sequence type and we are seeing what is, if the message is first in sequence or not. Okay. So here's the condition. So what we are checking over here is that, yeah, so we are checking if the payload sequence start is equals to message sequence number. For example, we have sent the first message in the sequence. Okay, so in this case this message has to be processed, right? So that is what we'll do, we'll return true. Or the message sequence minus latest sequence difference is equal to 1, which means that the current latest sequence is 2 and the upcoming sequence, which is 3, that is being sent. So even in that case it makes sense to return true. So that is what we are doing. Now in case if again now in this case again, if we get a record which is out of sequence, we return false. Or otherwise it's the sequence does not exist. Maybe someone has, like, it could be a situation wherein they push something wrong, like this packets, right? It's defined in the first table. Let me just show you the table as well. So this is the sequence type table, right? So it is having the data for only packets, right? And if someone sends a different sequence type which we do not have any idea of, so even in that case we should handle that situation. So that is what this condition does. It returns bad request. Yeah, so that's about the get endpoint. Then we have let's go to the post endpoint. So if this post endpoint will be used only in case we have, when there is a message with gaps. For example, you receive a message 2, which is the latest one is 2, but then you receive the message with 10. So in that case it has to be stored in the database. So the same thing, we are setting the message number, type and ID, and then we are going to this flow. All right, so in this flow we are again getting the latest sequence number, and then based on that we are running through a condition that if the message sequence number coming from the request is less than the latest sequence number, which is probably wrong, right? Because the latest sequence number is 2 and the message that we are trying to push in is less than 2, right? So that means the request is bad. So again we are sending the same message that the number you have entered is less than or equal to the latest sequence number. But if that's not the case, we just store it into the database. So what we are basically doing is we are fetching the type, getting the ID, sequence number, the data, the MIME type, and the timestamp. You can ignore this alerted. We have just kept it here because if there is a message which is staying there for a long period of time, which basically means there's something that has gone wrong, right? So in that case we can have a scheduler to just check the stale messages which are there for a longer period of time, and then we can trigger alerts saying that something is wrong over here. So yeah, that is what we can do. And then we are storing uh, the message details and then basically responding that sequence number created successfully. Then we have, let's go back to the put method. Yeah, so again the same thing, getting all the details. Then let's go to this put. Now this put is a bit slightly different because it has to do some overhead over here. So basically what we do is, if the particular message that was just processed and it was stored in the DB, we just delete it. Because if the 10th message was stored and it was basically requeued and then processed, so what the process API will do, that it will say that okay, I have processed the 10th message. So basically we, if it exists, we just delete it from the database because we no longer need it, right? So we just delete it. And then there is an upsert flow. So upsert flow is there because we want to update the latest sequence number. But if the request is first in the sequence, for example, like over here, yeah, so over here we have the sequence start as 1, right? Since the sequence start over here is 1, uh, we might have a request which is the first one, so we send a request which is having a sequence as 1, so that is the first, right? So in that case we might not have anything in the sequence state, which is right now we don't have anything, right? So in that case we'll have to insert. Okay, but if the request comes which is having sequence value as 2 and the latest sequence is 1, in that case we need to update, right? So that is what we are doing over here. We are just doing an upsert. So there's a condition choice, and we are getting the latest sequence state, and in case if it's empty, we just insert. If it's not, we just update. So we are updating the sequence state over here. Then once that is done, what we do is we again select the sequence stored messages. Now this is in case uh, if we just processed a message which was having a sequence 9. So the process API will send a put request, ask the utility API to update the latest sequence to 9. Now we will check the DB if there is any message 10. If there is, then we'll have to requeue, right? So this is for the requeue mechanism. So we will search if there is an immediate message after the sequence number that we have sent. So that is what we are doing. We are sending the sequence number plus 1 to get the immediate next message. So in case if the select query returns something, we go through this route. If it doesn't, then we say that there's no message available to requeue. Again, uh, we get the sequence type. Now the sequence, we have to call this sequence type table because we want to know, right, which queue to send the message. For example, if I go back over here, this table has the details about the routing key, about the exchange where it has to go. And in case if it's not about queue, then you'll have the address or the endpoint where you have to send the message. So in that case, we get those details. Then we just arrange the data, MIME type, sequence, data, exchange, and the routing key. And then we go through this requeue flow. Now this requeue flow is quite important and it has a dynamic evaluate. The reason why I have used dynamic evaluate is that the data which is present, which in the database, will be a serialized data, right? And we'll have to deserialize it. For example, if it is a JSON, then it will basically be a stringified JSON, right? We use the write function to do that. So in that case, we'll have to reconstruct the whole data, the whole payload. So for that, we are doing that. So it's basically we are creating a DW script, so its output, we don't know the MIME type, that will be dynamic, so we are just getting from payload.mime type. Split by is written because usually whenever the message is sent by other system, it the MIME type is the actual MIME type colon the encoding. So we are basically separating the encoding and the MIME type. So this would be basically application JSON or application XML or whatever octet stream it could be. And then we are using the read function because it would be a serialized data. So we use the read function and then assign, then also give the MIME type. So it should be able to reconstruct the whole payload. Okay. So once the whole payload gets reconstructed using this dynamic evaluate, we just publish it to AMQP. So I have intentionally kept this exchange as blank. I'm not using the one which is present because I just want to push the message directly to the queue. But in case if there are exchanges, we can use this. And I've given the routing key as payload.routing key, which is coming from the database. So it will just push the message. So the queue that has been used over here is RabbitMQ. I'll go to that as well. And then in the body, I'm sending the requeue payload. So this is how we are requeuing the payload. So once the payload is requeued, then the flow deletes the message which was stored. So if the 10th message has been requeued, it's a good idea to delete it because we no longer need it. And then the flow ends. So since there are multiple operations over here, there is an update and a delete as well. So that's the reason we have to use transactions so that the records are not left in an inconsistent state.
Yeah, hello, Vishwas.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a question from my side. So it might not be from the exact topic that we are doing today, but still, what is the exact difference between a normal transform message and this dynamic evaluate? Can you give me a small example or something?
Yeah, so in transform, you basically tell data view that this is the MIME type that I want and this is the structure of the data, right?
Okay.
But when you don't know, I mean, the data is in a serialized format. For example, it is a string JSON, okay? But
Mhm.
you don't know if it is a string JSON, if it is a string XML. Here we don't have the visibility, right? We don't know. We cannot hard code anything, right? It's
Okay.
dynamic. Someone
Okay.
can send JSON, someone can send XML. So now in such cases, we have to recreate the payload, right? We have to recreate XML, JSON based on what data is stored in the DB.
Yes.
Example,
So
sequence stored message, right? So I don't have messages right now over here, but we, based on the MIME type, I'll have to recreate the whole payload, because the data which will be stored will be in the string format. Okay,
okay,
so we
okay.
might not be able to, so we have to recreate the payload. So
Recreate
just,
the payload based on the MIME type that we are receiving, right? Yep.
yeah, so to
Okay.
recreate the payload, we are basically creating the database script. If you observe this, this will
Yes, yes.
finally
Got it.
get
Got it.
evaluated into database. So output application JSON, CSV, whatever, and it will read. So read function will basically then read the serialized data and will send the MIME type,
Okay, okay.
right?
So that's why we use that component, right? Yep.
Yeah,
Got it.
so
Got
that
it.
is why we use this
And
target.
also, yeah, one more question from my side. So, is there any specific reason you have gone for RabbitMQ, or it's just for usage you have simply chosen that?
I had everything set up on this machine with RabbitMQ, so I
Okay,
chose
that's
to
all.
use it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah. Sure.
yeah. You can
Sure.
choose anything, but just
Yes.
that you, it could be an HTTP endpoint as well, but just
Okay.
that you change it over here
Okay.
in
Okay.
sequence type.
Got it. Got it. Yes. Thanks, Vishwas.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, that's about the resequencer utility API. Now the process API, usually that uh, the other developers would implement, have to orchestrate all the data, right? The calls to this utility API. So what I've done over here is just a listener which is listening to a queue, which is data packets queue. So whenever any message comes in, it goes through this flow reference. I've set the manual acknowledgement, so it won't acknowledge automatically until and unless the whole processing finishes off. So doing some transformation, which is basically I'm trying to get the data. That is what I'm interested in, and I'll just write the data to a file. So first call is a get call to really know if the message is in sequence, or it is a message which is in sequence but has gaps, or the message is completely bad message. So based on what it is, if it is a bad message, it will error out right away over here, because we are sending 400 and that comes into the error series. So it will end up. But in case if the message is next in series, which means that we get a true response, then we write it to a file. And once we write it to a file, we update the latest sequence. And that is what we are doing. We're creating a variable path. Let me just show you what is this variable. This is the path variable. So I'm just creating a endpoint URL. So I'm getting the sequence type, the sequence version, and the sequence number. It's as good as this, what I'm doing. Packets, sequence version, and the message sequence number. So this I'm getting from the request payload that is being sent to RabbitMQ. So yeah, that is what we are doing. By creating this path, and then we call the get endpoint and the put endpoint to just update the data accordingly. Now in case if the the condition comes to be otherwise, which is false, so it goes to this route, and we have to push the data. So observe that the data which I'm sending, I am serializing it using the write function. So I'm just getting the data, the MIME type of the data, and it will convert into a string, and then it will get stored into, it will call the resequencer utility API, and it will just store it right away. And I'm also ensuring that I send the MIME type, so that even that gets stored, and when the resequencer has to requeue the message, it is able to do that. Yeah. So yeah, that's about this two APIs. Now I have already deployed this API, so and also tried a few runs. Now let's just test this again. So what I'll do, I'll push in message for that. So this is the file that will get created. I tested with a mule string, but let's test it again. So let me just save it. It's a blank file. What I'll do, I'll send a message from RabbitMQ. Okay, so I'll send the word mule, but I'll send it string by string, letter by letter. So it's a four character word, right? So let's, what we'll do is we'll first send the first value, which is one, and we'll make it as DPS. So first word will be mule, M. Mule starts with M, right? So So what would happen basically in this case is this will get successfully processed and it will be visible in the file. And what we'll observe is right now we have only this sequence type table with some values populated. Other tables are just empty. Sequence state has no data, and message, even this has no data. Okay, so let's see what are the changes. So let's quickly fire this message and let's see what changes do we observe. So sequence state, let's go over here. So now as we see, we have the latest sequence as one, id as dps1, and packets, right? So this was basically an insert operation because it was a very first message in the sequence, so it has gone through it. Now let's go to the file and check it.
Vishwas, yeah, sorry to interrupt, but I think it's just a common question from Akshay Jain. He asks why the project is showing error in studio. It's
Yeah,
maybe,
yeah, it like sometimes it's like it caches some data and then we can basically run a clean over here and then it will
yeah,
show.
maybe it's unrefreshing the payload, right? Maybe that's
Yeah,
the, yes, yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
It sometimes happens. Like even I don't have a correct answer to this, but yeah,
yes,
it
okay,
sometimes unnecessarily shows issues, but it works properly.
yeah, okay, sure, go on. Yeah.
All right. So we see that the word M has come, right? So now let's try with some other words. Uh, okay. So now I'll send a message which is with gaps, right? So let's send the last word, which is E. Okay, and the sequence number will be 4 for that because this is the last sequence. So yeah, let's publish this and let's see what happens. So if we go back to the file, we only have the letter M, there's nothing else. And let's go to the DB and let's see. Now this message has to be stored in DB, right? Because it was out of sequence, but it was a valid one. So see, we have this. So this is the sequence data which came into it. So we have it safe over here and we can requeue it later on. Okay. And sequence number is 4. MIME type is application JSON. Timestamp and alerted is N by default. Okay. So, and we should not have that letter E. We just have M. Okay. Now let's go back and send L, which is, sorry, it's 3 and L. So even this uh, will get stored into the DB. So let's just check it out. Okay, let's go back to the file. There's no addition over here. And let's see in the sequence stored message, we have 3 and 4. And let's check the latest sequence, which is there. Latest sequence is still 1 because we haven't processed any other sequence. The other sequence were processed, but like we didn't send it, we just stored it, right? So now what should happen when I send the letter U, it should trigger the third one, and then when the third one gets triggered, it should automatically pick up the fourth one. So let's just try to send the message which is sequence 2 with U. Okay, and now let's see what happens in the file. So we see that Mule has come up, right? So it automatically requeued the message properly, which is the third and the fourth message, and we have the complete word Mule. And now if we go back to the sequence state, let's see what is the difference now. So the latest sequence is 4 because the fourth message was processed. If we go to this, we don't have any data, right? So which means that all the messages were requeued and deleted successfully, correct? So yeah, so now we have the final data which is mule. So in this way you can also implement this resequencer pattern. Now we can also try it over here through the endpoints because it was a process API which was calling the endpoints. So let's go back and see what is the sequence type. So it's packets and this. Okay, let's see the sequence state once. It's DPS1, right? So let's try to play around with it. So this is DPS1 and let me just send it one again. Right? One is already processed, latest sequence is 4 and let's see what it says. See, it's saying latest sequence number is greater or equal to the sequence number entered. What if I send sequence number 5, latest sequence number is 4, so it should return me true, and it's doing that, it's returning me true. What if I send it as 10? It returns me false because it's valid, but it has some gaps in between, so it's returning false. Then if I change this packets to something else, it gives me an error because we don't have any detail for this in this uh, sequence type table. So this is a dependency. Someone has to add these values manually, because for anything to resequence you should at least know what is the sequence start, right? It cannot automatically understand what is the sequence. So that someone has to tell the application. Yeah, so yeah, that is all. We can try out with this resequencer, and uh, you can implement in your own projects where you need resequencer pattern. Yeah, so I hope.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which was just a request from one of the participants, Aditya. He asks to just show the entries in sequence table once.
Sequence tables.
Yep.
Which sequence table?
Sequence type, sequence underscore type table. Yep.
Yeah, this is the one.
Yeah, he just wanted to see what are the entries of this table. That's what he has asked in the chat. So, Aditya, is that what you wanted? Or if you have any more questions, I can give you the speaker access and you can speak. Or if anyone else has any other questions, I can give you the speaker access. Okay, there is one more question from Aditya. He is asking what is alerting underscore period. What is alerting period?
Yeah, so we didn't use this in the application, but like I said, right, there could be situation wherein the sequence stored message might have message in it, okay, but due to some reason we were unable to requeue the message, or maybe some worst case scenario, some errors occurred, okay, and the message stays here forever, and that's a bad idea because I mean someone will be searching out for the message, right? So in that case I have an alerted flag which by default is in, but when this alerting period will basically define how long the scheduler should trigger. This is not implemented in the solution right now. It's just an extra thing that I've added. So if it is like 10, so we define it as 10 seconds. So the scheduler will run for this specific thing every 10 seconds to check if there are any records which have expired the timestamp, and then it will raise an alert. It's just for a recovery mechanism for the worst case, but I just thought of keeping the example quite simple, so that is why I didn't implement it this part. But yeah, that was the reason behind adding this alerting period.
It is clear, Aditya. And also, there is one more question from him. He is asking what is Requeue exchange.
Yeah, so requeue in RabbitMQ we have a concept of exchange and queues, okay. So any message comes through a queue, comes to a queue via an exchange. So even if there is no exchange, it is a default exchange and which is blank. But in case if there is an, you want to send out a message which is through an exchange and it gets fanned out, or maybe it has a direct mapping, right? So in that case you have a routing key, okay. So you have an exchange, you have a routing key, so those details are required for a message to go. So that's the requeue exchange. When the message, which go back over here, like I said, right, in the put resource, uh, post, oops, like I said over here, right? If the message is just next in the sequence, right, we have to requeue the message, right? So to requeue the message, let me go back over here. So to requeue the message, I need to know the exchange and I need to know the routing key, okay. But in this case I just wanted to push the message directly to the queue, so I intentionally kept it as blank. Blank means the default exchange, so it will directly push to the queue rather than the exchange. But in case if there is a scenario wherein you want to push to the exchange through a routing key based on, for example, you have an orders exchange and you have a routing key as prepaid, so you want any order posted in the orders exchange with the routing key as prepaid goes to the prepaid queue. So in such cases you need exchange, right? And that's the reason the exchange is placed over here. You can specify the exchange, but this is specific only when using RabbitMQ. If there is some other implementation of queue and even that follows the same concept, you use it. Or if it is an HTTP endpoint, you use the URL. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, hope that answers you, Aditya. And we have one more question, Vishwas. It's from Kavali Ria. So she asks, can you show once more a scenario where it throws the 400 error?
Okay, 400 error. Yeah, so what I can do is packets. It, so it will throw 400 error in case if the latest sequence is 4, but you are sending a sequence which is less than 4, which means that it's wrong, right? For this revision, which is DPS1, we have already processed a message which was of the ID 4, but now I am sending an ID as 1, so which is wrong, right? So it has thrown this 400 error. Invalid sequence. It will also throw 400 when you just send a message sequence type which is not even present in the database, which means that resequencer is unaware of this is something different for it. So even in that case it will say sequence does not exist, I have no idea what it is. Does that answer your question?
Yes, she got it. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's fine. So if anyone else wants to ask any more questions and you're having trouble leaving in your questions in the chats, I can give you the speaker access. So you can just let me know in the chats. I can, enable the mic for you, so you can directly ask to Vishwas. Um, Seems like all others understood everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So seems like that was the final question from her, and yep, I think we are good to go.
Yeah, so what I can do is I can just push the code to GitHub, and anyone who is interested in using or working out with the solution, they can access it.
Yep. Yeah. Just one more question from my side, Vishwas. So
Yeah.
I was just wondering. So in which can you just give me a scenario where exactly we would want to use this sequence? Because you told me this thing is presently not there, or this capability is not there for MuleSoft, right? So what are all are the disadvantages or some kind of cons that we are facing right now with the absence of this utility? Or you told me there is a aggregator utility, right? So why not we are going fully with that, and why
Yeah.
we
So
yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
go
so
on.
aggregator is basically to aggregate all the data and then push it in one go. Okay,
Okay.
but you have messages coming in demand and you have to quickly send it out. Okay, and those are out of sequence, so you can't wait and aggregate all the data and publish only when the sequence is complete, right? We just want to publish it as and when it comes, but it has to be published in the right sequence. So in that case we have to go with this utility because there's no inbuilt mechanism. And for example, where you find it useful, uh, I'll take an example of my own project wherein we had we had shipments coming up. Okay, and those
Mhm.
shipments had to be processed in proper order. Had to be sent to another system in a proper order in which they come. So what used to happen, there was a process in between which used to just jumble this shipments. Randomly it will to improve speed, what they might have done, implemented some scatter type of functionality and just send it in any order, but the end system wants it in a specific order. If first shipment 1 was sent, it should come only first, it should not happen the second one comes before first, right?
Okay.
So it's
Okay.
a common integration pattern which is there in many integration tools.
Okay, got it, got it. But yeah, just one more doubt. The thing is, if we are concerned about the sequence, right? So we do have any point MQ and all those things, and whether we have these first in, first out orders and everything, right? So if I remember, I worked with it initially, I guess, a few months back or something. So if I remember, there also we can maintain the order, right? Or is it in the other way? Please correct me if I'm wrong. So
In any point MQ you have first in first out, but again, if you'll have an API which will push to any point MQ, right?
yes,
And
yes.
the API itself is receiving messages which are out of order. What can
Okay,
you do?
okay.
You
In that
have to
case,
resequence, right?
yes. Got it, got it, got it. In that case, yes, we don't have a mechanism at present. Yeah, got your point. Got it. Yes, thanks, Vishwas. So seems like no one else has anything else. Yep.
Okay. So yeah, so over to you then, John.
Yeah. Thank you, Vishwas. Thank you so much. So I guess, guys, it's all clear to you, and I do believe it was a new topic for me. So anyway, I guess that was the same for you guys also. So, but I didn't see many questions. Seems like everyone understood things. Yep. And let's move to the next thing now, which is the trivia quiz. I'll just quickly share my screen. Uh, my screen is visible, right?
I don't see.
How about
Yeah,
now?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I can see.
yes. So, guys, as usual, we'll be playing it in the Kahoot platform. So, what I want is in a while or in a few seconds, I'll display a Kahoot screen where you can see in your see a code there. So you basically have to play it with your phone. So what really happens is the questions will be displayed on the screen along with the options, as well as each option will be having different colors. For option A it will be red, option B it will be green, option C a different color, so like that. So you just have to basically play with your smartphones. You just have to log into kahoot.it, kahoot.it, kahoot.it. I'll show you the screen, and basically type in that code and you'll be able to log in with a nickname that you can provide. Okay. And also some of the few prerequisites before participating for this is this is mainly for people who are not certified or who want to give other certifications like integration or platform certifications. And if there is anyone among us who has actually won a coupon or who has actually taken a certification in the last 30 days, it's better we give chance for others to do that. So even in case if you win a coupon at this point, it will be considered void. So the only thing is you should not have won or got a coupon in the last 30 days. So we can just give chances to people who have not participated or who has not got chance to get certified. Okay, so I'll just quickly share my Kahoot screen. Give me a moment. um, I hope my screen is visible. So you guys can just log into kahoot.it in your mobiles and just type in this code. We'll be basically having just 5 questions, and we'll take the top three. We'll give it a few more minutes for others to join. So in case if others are not joining because you guys have already won, it's fine. But we'll give some more time for others to join. Okay, maybe I think I'll just lock the event now so we can play with the 13 members. So guys, let's start. So as I said, you can see the options on the screen along with the some colors over there, which is encircled in the options, and you can just click on that on the phone. Okay, so let's lock and start. So this was actually explained by Vishwas. Yep. So the answer is three. So nine of them got it right. So let's see who all are there in the podium. Okay, it is no one. Okay, that's an interesting name. Okay, maybe you can provide a real name. No one. It's fine. We won't be able to understand otherwise. It's fine anyway. But okay, and then it's Aditya and Abhishek. All right. Let's go to the second question. Just a common question. Must have seen this for our certifications and all. Okay. So nine of them answered it right. Let's see the scoreboard again. Okay, now there is a major shift in the change. So it's Akshay Jain, Dinesh, and Suraj on the top three positions. So let's quickly go to the third question. PKCS full form? Just a true or false question. Oh, it's an equal. Six of them answered right and six of them answered wrong. The actual answer is public key cryptographic standards. It's not certificate standards. So let's see the scoreboard again. Okay, it's again Akshay, Jain, Dinesh, and Suraj. Let's go to the fourth question. So again, from what Vishwas has explained. Yep. So four of them answered it right. So let's see the scoreboard again. It's Suraj, Abhishek Sasin, and Akshay Jain. So let's go to the last and final question of the contest. Again, from the same topic that we heard today. Yep. So majority of them answered it right. So let's see the final podium, guys. Okay, it's Akshay in the third position and Abhishek in the second. Yep, and we have Suraj in the first position. Congrats, Suraj, Abhishek, and Akshay. Maybe if you can just send in me your congrats to everyone actually who participated. Yeah, but unfortunately we can give coupons to only the first three. So if you can just leave in your mail IDs to me, I can get back to you later. So I assume you have not won anything in the last 30 days or something. So please send in your mail IDs and I'll get back to you at the earliest. Thank you guys. Thank you everyone for participating. But before you leave, uh, just a moment. So, just like what I said, yeah, you can send your mail IDs here, Akshay. Yes, you can send your mail IDs in here in the chats. I can take it from them. So the thing is, thank you guys again for joining this session. And the main thing I want to say is, we really, really appreciate your feedback, and that's something which really fuel meetup groups, MuleSoft meetup groups. So you can, if you intend to share this in your, social platforms like LinkedIn or anything, please do it with the hashtag MuleSoft meetups or Calicut MuleSoft meetups. So that has better reach, and you'll be getting a post survey mail after this, and you can just respond to whatever thing you got from this this meetup, or whether it is positive or negative. You can please leave in there so that we can improve ourselves and come up with a better topic next time. You also have a provision to leave in your favorite topics or something, so you can mail with that too also. So we'll just look to it and try to come back with a more appropriate topic according to your choice. So that's it from my side, guys. Thank you everyone for joining today, and thank you Vishwas again for your valuable time. So I'm sure everyone just benefits the best out of it. So
Thanks, John. Thanks, everyone.
yeah, thank you all, thank you for joining. See you soon. Thank you. Bye. Thank you, Vishwas. Bye.
Bye.
Bye all.